All right, Sammy, we are live on the podcast. Thanks for taking the time to join me today.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Great to be on.
It's my pleasure. Can you please just give the audience a bit of a rundown as to, who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I work at Marchon Nutrition. I'm head of performance nutrition, and I work with a range of people from like elite professional athletes down to kind of recreational athletes and everyone in between. So those looking to up their performance, or simply those just looking to a more of a weekend warrior, looking to get the most out of their training, but also just improve their relationship with food. Everything in between. And I generally say I like to try and bridge the gap between performance and body image. There's lots of different ways that people do stuff, and I think body image is definitely an emerging topic that I see has an impact on so many people, no matter what level of athlete you are. And I find it a really interesting topic to dive into that and ultimately help people to increase their performance, whether it's physically and mentally, and just looking at where their kind of body image sits and ensuring that their well-being is still a top priority.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah, and I think that's as we were chatting about before we got on air, it's that how do we explore that middle ground between not falling prey to diet culture where thinner is always better and where we weight loss at any cost and through restrictive methods versus how do we work on ourselves but do so from a place of acceptance, compassion, and, as you said, working on our relationship with food and body image at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just such a messy middle ground. It really is. It's like sitting in the grey area. But I think there's often so many strong opinions around it as well. There's people who are kind of still in the mix of diet culture. A lot of the fitness industry is. Then there's the people on the other end of the spectrum who are kind of very much anti-diet culture. And I definitely sit somewhere in the middle. But I think you almost have to look at things through a different lens when you're looking with performance, because undoubtedly there will be some people who will perform better if they're lighter, if they're slightly leaner. And it's like I'm currently working with a professional rugby player, and his goal was to like maintain mass. His whole rugby career has been told that he needs to gain weight, he needs to be bigger, and now it's okay, can we maintain that mass but be leaner? And so it's kind of a goal that just doesn't really sit in with diet culture, but it's how do we achieve this then that ultimately helps him to get to where he wants to be performance wise, but also in a way that doesn't ruin his relationship with food, and if anything can better it. And I know I've definitely worked with quite a few athletes who have a pretty poor relationship with food. Just it's from their perception, it just comes with the package. It's quite a normalized thing. So it's how do we achieve that in a way that supports his performance, gets him to where he wants to be, needs to be, where his coaches are saying he needs to be, but in a way that still allows him to eat out, enjoy foods, and not be in a worse place ultimately.
I think there's a certain sacrifice that might be made for professional athletes when they have the time frame and the resources and things to dedicate certain lives to it. But as you mentioned, you have to be sensitive then to that person's relationship with food and themselves, and how that might have a knock-on effect. And I listened to a really good podcast between Dr. Alex George and the UK gymnast Simone Biles.
Oh yeah, nice.
And how she was talking about how actually it was always about getting her to be smaller to improve her performance. And I want to ask you that question about, okay, being leaner, improving performance. Is that always the case? Like, is there not a case to be said about people getting stronger, fitter, and improving their performance from a place of maintaining their mass, where actually chasing fat loss could affect their fueling? Where is that balance between being leaner, affecting performance?
For sure, 100%. And I definitely think that a lot of people use performance as just a mask to, like, I need to be leaner because it's going to help performance. It's like just kind of moving the goalpost slightly, and for sure maybe they're telling themselves that the outcome isn't because of aesthetic, it's because of performance. But the how they do it, or the methods that they choose, and the kind of the psychology behind it is ultimately just moving the goalpost. It's still restrictive. It's still how they do it. And for definitely for a lot of people, it's likely that actually, being leaner might, or the methods that they get to that might then impact performance. It's then difficult when if it's like a combat sport or gymnastics, where ultimately a lot of it is body weight kind of calisthenics, and same with CrossFit. It's at what point is being leaner actually going to be beneficial? And often that is a journey that people have to go on, and they kind of just have to go through that. As much as you can tell someone it's might not be helpful for them, sometimes it's literally just a process. I always say that nutrition and so much of life is trial, error, and compromise. And I think a lot of people will come through that and acknowledge that I wasn't a better athlete when I was leaner. I wasn't fueled for my sessions. My recovery was poor. And then it's being able to kind of build that trust and the rapport to get them through the kind of the other side of that, and have the support to get them eating a little bit more, and seeing how that impacts their training, how it impacts their recovery. But I completely agree that being leaner doesn't always equal better performance. There might be some situations where it does, like particularly rugby players, it might do. Gymnastics, the kind of logically for a lot of people on the surface it makes sense, but when you start to dive into it and looking at, okay, what does that look like if you're being, what is the food you're eating? What does that breakdown look like? That's when it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a good point to bring up, because, we could all train and eat the same way and look completely different, right? We all have our own genetic blueprint and the way that we're going to respond to certain things. And therefore, like, our best weight is going to be different from someone else's. And I think that's what, I really have compassion for people who compete in weight-based sports like weightlifting and combat sports. And you can understand it from a combat position in terms of the, beat like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, for example, and grappling and throwing, and like weight can make a huge difference there. But if you've got someone who feels they need to be in one weight class, but they perform better at another weight class, and it's then that really complex relationship between, body image, weight on the scale versus how well they're performing. Gymnastics, okay, there's body weight to strength ratio, but as we've just said there, you've got to find that best balance where you're eating enough food to fuel your training, and therefore gaining muscle, gaining strength, performing at a higher intensity, and therefore performing better at your sport. Whereas chasing fat loss by any cost could then cost you that performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just such a delicate balance.
It is. And I think people expect, maybe not hugely expect it, but they want us to have all the answers. They want us to tell them right, you need to eat X, Y, and Z to perform like this. And I was just on a consult this morning, and we were just going over how it is so much of you just have to try it and see how you go, and note how this impacts you, because for what I say to someone and give them guidance on how to get their performance better might have a completely different impact and have a very different effect, like to the next person. So as I say, is that kind of like trial and error, and there likely is a compromise, and what that compromise looks like for different people will be different things.
Massively. And as you said, people, I think that's where like diet culture starts to take over, is that severe diet culture is the like severe need to be thinner by any means necessary, and thinner is always better, and weight loss by any means necessary, but more like the whole desire and need for an external control, and that lack of like ability to trial, error, test, retest, and build that trust yourself. As you said, like, so for my background of CrossFit and tracking macros, I could say, it was totally based on performance, but it wasn't. It was based on getting leaner, which was the wrong reason. But it was that desire to have, I need to know exactly how much to eat all of the time, versus taking the principles of good nutrition and the principles of like, okay, protein to grow, carbs to go, fats for mojo. How do I alter my intake based on my activity and help me feel my best? It was the need to be like, no, you need to eat exactly this, and this will bring you those results. And it's moving away from that to a more, how do I use these principles and then find out what works best for me?
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of comes with the like non-judgmental element of it, like trial and error, but knowing that there can't be any judgment in the areas, it's just an observation. And that's often where people really struggle with. And it kind of comes from the want to control everything, which ultimately is partly down to perfectionism. And that's where they're all kind of linked: perfectionism, control, and errors or failures. And wanting to be able to kind of achieve all of those things. And that's when diet culture really starts to take over, is the judgment when it comes from the errors and the want to control every single element, and having the kind of flexibility to let them be. And I guess where the compromise part comes, and the compromise for a lot of people has to be acceptance. And it's the acceptance that I can't do all of those things. And that's the acceptance, the compromise comes from moving out of diet culture and just kind of meeting ourselves where we're at and knowing that we can't do all of those things, and that's completely okay, and the acceptance that kind of has to come with that.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, and it's good to it's good to know that there are more and more practitioners like moving in that direction to help people with that kind of acceptance, and that also that acceptance of the unknown, and that embracement of that embracing of the process that is involved there. Like, okay, like if you don't want to be always relying on apps to tell you how much to eat or diets to tell me on meal plans, then you're going to have to embrace this unknown, where we start listening to your body a bit more. We have rational thought about the energy that you're expending due to the sport that you're in, and then we combine those things together to test and retest certain food groups, certain food amounts, pre and post workout meals, evening nutrition, to find what helps you perform better. And then your body's going to respond over a long period of time. Like, I think the diet culture is that whole like, right, you have to lose weight every week, and if you're not losing a pound of fat a week, then you're eating too much food and you need to change. And it doesn't take into account the variables that go into the scale, and it doesn't take into account the fact of like, if you strength train for 3 to 5 times a week for 10 years, like, you're going to pack on a lot of muscle, and over time, like, your body's going to change, but it takes that process of 10 years. It's not that, hey, do this diet for 3 months and you'll get this amazing transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And it takes such a long time to be able to build muscle, and the acceptance of that, and not wanting the kind of instant results. And I also think it's definitely a huge element, particularly coming out of diet culture. And if you do want to like trying to get stronger or gain muscle, part of that, I think that the kind of a really underrated part is the kind of readiness to change. And as much as we feel like we're out of diet culture, I think there's still the interim between that of actively seeking some different goals, whether they're performance based or whatever that may be, of then being like, okay, right, I do need to eat a little bit more. I need to look at certain macros a bit more. And it's I think we go through a bit of a stage of rebellion. I think a lot of people do. I definitely did, of coming out of diet culture, and it is rebelling against it. Like, if you go out and you kind of want to eat I don't know, like a salad or something, but you're like, well, no, I can't, because it's like that's what diet culture would do, when actually it's legit what you want. But we feel like we need to rebel against it, even if we know that for performance we're going to be better off probably having some more carbohydrates. But it's just that interim, and then it's that kind of period of time where you're a little bit in limbo when you want to go after performance a bit more, but we're just not quite at that stage to fully commit and change. And I think that's often a very overrated part of it. And that kind of the interim can, for some people, it might be like instantaneous, if you might be able to fully commit, or it might be like a year, 2 years of being able to fully accept, I guess, is the kind of the biggest the process in that, which allows you to kind of move on to the next chapter of life, basically.
Absolutely agree. I think it's the intention psychologically behind the decision that matters most. And like, even when I interviewed Evelyn, who co-founded Intuitive Eating, she mentioned the same thing of the like, because we talked about exercise and purposeful movement, and I said, some anti-diet folk may be quite anti-exercise, and she was like, well, it's more the intention. And of course, intuitive eating is like, even the intention to change your body could be seen as a dangerous one. And I think this is where, as we spoke about, like, where's that middle ground? And the psychology of your eating decisions are similar. Like, as you said, like, if you genuinely want a salad, then and you're at that time where you're like, yeah, like I really fancy like the crunchy, crispy, fresh like veggies, and having it with like whatever, and I'm going to really enjoy that, then like, yeah, bang on. But if you're having a salad because you're like, oh, but I'm afraid of carbohydrates, it's like, well, the psychological like impact from diet culture is still there, and probably needs to be repaired first. And talk to me about that with regards to, because we hear so much more these days, relationship with food. I post a lot about it because of my own journey through it. Do you feel that that's something that needs to be worked upon first before someone has a physical goal? Can they be worked alongside it? What's your take on that based on your experience?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I probably would have moved camps a fair bit on, like, you can do both, you can't do both, and going back and forth. And ultimately, I think it's going to depend on the person, depending on their history, where they are now. I think if I was to give it a generalization, I would generally always want to work on that relationship with food. But I think when a client comes to you and they're aware that they want to work on their relationship with food, I think there has to be a slight element of meeting them where they're at. And even if I can see that I know this is definitely what they need, if they're not ready for that, kind of coming back to the readiness to change. If they think they are, but you can see if there's some kind of hesitations there in the conversations that you have, it's really obvious that there's still just some kind of, they're just not quite there. Kind of meeting them where they are, whether that's for a few weeks, a few months of just kind of allowing them to feel a bit more comfortable, and during that time you can kind of build the rapport that, like, okay, actually this is what we really need to do. And it's not as if it's going to be we'd start with like a full-on hardcore diet, but it might be, okay, I know realistically they could really do with working on their relationship with food, but maybe we'll do some like photos of food just so they can feel like it's not all about that relationship with food, and as they learn, again, it's them learning that what they're doing isn't actually going to be helpful for them. And throughout that early phase, their readiness to change changes, and they become more ready to accept that they actually need to do the hard shit. They need to work on their relationship with food, because for so many people, the easy part is dieting. It's looking at their food intake. Even if it's not dieting, it's monitoring their food intake and just being aware of what they're doing. The hard stuff comes from like the inner work, the really hard stuff that takes a lot of effort and energy. So they feel comfortable with the earlier stuff, and that's when you can kind of build that relationship to help them work on it. And for a lot of clients, that's kind of where we might start with some food pictures, just discussing a little bit more about their diet history and going into some of the influences behind their thoughts now, why they do the things they do now. And I generally call it like a bit of a discovery phase of, we focus on their nutrition now, but it's more of not coming from a place of we're going to change this to like lead to fat loss. It's actually just an awareness phase of looking at the habits they do now. Why do they do them? Like, what's the thought process around them? What's the intentions? And then maybe taking it back to when those intentions started. Where did they come from? And that's often a really helpful phase to them it's going to help their relationship with food, but they also feel like they're looking at their habits, which kind of ticks the box from their end of things, which then allows us to look more about relationship with food. And it might be that we go through a big phase of working on the relationship with food and their body image, and it might be further down the line that actually they feel ready to like pursue a little bit of fat loss, but it's done in a way that is very different to perhaps they previously would have done it from in a place of diet culture. And I guess throughout that middle stage, that journey, I always say, I hate the word journey, but it just is it's a big old journey. It's a roller coaster. There's ups and downs, and throughout that process, we'll look at someone's values and look at what's important to them. And if we kind of discover that, say, one of their values is flexibility and independence, that then okay, maybe we then move on to their relationship with food. We've established that they now have a better relationship with themselves. They're probably in a much better position to kind of pursue that. And that's when we might do both of them together. It's still working on their relationship with food, but we might bring in this element of fat loss or body composition. But we can do it in a way that does align with their values. So say it's flexibility and independence. Say their go-to would be to meal prep, they get everything sorted and they have themselves set up for the week. Then it would come to it and realize they don't want to eat those meals because, right, we kind of acknowledge that they like the element of flexibility and they like the kind of autonomy and choice to decide, and that doesn't align with like having meals set for each day, each week. And that's often why it hasn't worked for them previously in the past. And it just doesn't sit well with them, and it doesn't make them feel good. So how do we change that in a way that does actually align with their values a little bit more? And throughout the process, we might even figure that fat loss in itself doesn't align with their values. But it's say if it is someone who is overweight and they are at a greater risk of various comorbidities, and actually fat loss is going to be something that helps them, then we can do it in a way that acts in line with their values and makes them feel more comfortable, I guess, physically and mentally, but in a way that is still supporting their relationship with food, and ultimately we can still help improve it. So it's very much a transitional phase and dependent on the individual in front of me.
Yeah, and I like that, Sammy, in terms of, as you mentioned, okay, well, the person who's coming to us, like, they want to work on food, and the easiest part has usually been that external control. Like, everybody who comes to both of us has probably used MyFitnessPal once or twice or 11 billion times, and that whole idea of using okay, like measuring out my almonds and my oats and knowing the calories, like I've got that down, but actually the intentions behind their decision making isn't there. Like, as you said, the reasons that they eat and their current habits, and okay, well, why, if they're overeating at night or over snacking, or if they're emotional eating or stress eating, like, we need to be aware of why those things are happening, which is, as you've mentioned, like the photos and then the journaling helps, because you're now thinking about your decisions and why, and what's actually being eaten, rather than just the numbers, the external figure control. And similar to how I work with clients about their values, as you said, right? Oh yeah, you value flexibility, but then you're eating the same meal every day. And actually you say that's because of health, but there's actually more health found in a more diverse range of foods. You're actually having the same food every day because it feels safe, because you've been used to having that amount of calories and you feel like that's the healthy thing to eat. And then so it's like, just like I do, it's like pulling into their thoughts about that and being like, what's the thought behind that? And is that realistic? Is that helpful? And if not, how do we reframe that to something that is? And as you said, the why behind fat loss.
Yeah.
Is it actually a goal that you really, really want? Is it in your values? And if not, is it just there because you think you want it? And that's why I asked the conversation of like, being leaner equals better performance, because I think that's the narrative. It's like everybody wants to lose fat because they're like, oh, it'll improve my performance and I'll look better and therefore I'll be happier. It's like, but what if you're actually more neurotic about your body and your food and you're less happy?
Yeah.
And like, that's a question that people don't ask themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is often the case that people are like not as happy in a smaller body. They're particularly if they've come from, maybe they've lost weight and they've gained it again. Whether it's intentionally lost it, or I mean, I've had conversations this week with people, someone who had an injury and happened to lose weight in that process, and got loads of compliments about how great they looked, and now they've kind of regained that weight as a natural repercussion, got back into just actually being able to eat a little bit more. So when they were unhealthy, they were having these compliments, and now it becomes, it's the kind of, they're far more aware of their body now, and constantly like wanting to move back into that smaller body because of just these kind of external factors. So it's looking at the intentions, and even though kind of before, if you're feeling kind of happy in the body that you're in, and to be fair, this happened to me. I was ill in September last year, and I'd gone on my own little journey. I say little, of course it's massive, it's spanning over years. I'm in a place where I was very comfortable with the body I was in, and then I lost weight, got loads of compliments, and actually no one understood that I lost weight because I was ill, couldn't eat anything for a week, and I lost quite a lot of weight in a short period of time. And I was almost like shocked at myself at how my like body checking increased, and how I was just far more aware of my body in a smaller way, and like almost the want to kind of keep it there. And then you have to chat to yourself, like what am I doing? This doesn't act in line with my values, and you're able to kind of move away from that. But and I think it happens to so many people, is that the kind of the fluctuations in the body image checking and our thoughts around our body, from like various different times. And a lot of the time it's not actually the body that changes, it's just our perceptions of ourselves, which is why so much of what I do is working on body image and looking at the influences behind it, like literally going back from when we're like really little. knowing that kind of societal influences start from literally like day dot, right from the get-go. And it's always really interesting to kind of go into those things as to where did these body image struggles kind of come from. And that's often one that particularly elite athletes aren't expecting to do. And it's definitely something that I'd like to do more of as well. Of I guess it's probably comes from a bit of awareness and education just generally in the professional sport and industry of knowing that how they think about themselves can obviously impact their performance. But people just don't expect it when they think they're coming for nutrition, and then we end up talking about like loads of different topics, because so much of the time it's not really, it's just the perceptions, it's the experiences and everything around it. That goes into why they eat. So it's undoubtedly a big old topic to kind of go into.
It is, yeah, and I post quite regularly just the same sentence. It's not about the food and the fitness; it's about your thoughts behind the food and fitness that matter far more. Which always provokes the thought in people's head of like, like I thought it was just about eating clean and avoiding chemicals and all of those horrific diet culture-y, shitty relationship with food thoughts. And I'm glad how you didn't talk down your own journey. You were like, oh, my little journey, but actually it's quite long. And actually, because everybody's journey is unique and will be long because we've lived on this earth for X amount of years. And I remember talking with Evelyn Tripoli last week, and I was on someone else's podcast this week, Harriet, and talking about my own journey. And actually it took me quite a long time to like talk through the whole thread. And it's actually something I do with clients with regards to like their timeline of diet history. And it even starts, as you said, once you see diet culture, you can't unsee it. Like, think about all the comments that your parents said about their own body weights or their food that they were eating, and the messages that you had about the foods that you should or shouldn't be eating, or how much you should or shouldn't be eating. And did you have to clean your plate? And did you have to eat this before you were allowed dessert? And did you watch Love Actually and see all of the fat jokes that were inadvertently made to Marty McCutcheon, which is ridiculous, and all these different subtle messages throughout our lives. And you mentioned there, like, you lost weight because you were unwell, yet you were complimented by it. And people don't mean to be like damaging when they compliment weight loss, but that can be that inadvertent message, isn't it? Of like, oh, right, like, okay, so do I look better? Am I more worthy because of this? And then that's when people psychologically might head to a darker place because of the compliments they receive in being a smaller body, and picking that is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like looking at like what goes into like a negative body image, and I think people assume that a positive body image is actually just the opposite of that, but actually it just having a more positive body image just makes you more, I guess, resilient and unlikely to interact with events like that. If someone does comment on your body or something does happen, having a more positive body image just means that you're less likely to then buy into those ideals. And I think that's the kind of difference in separating the ideas of what a negative body image and what a positive body image actually is. And explaining that with a client is that you can have negative body image days, but generally have like a relatively positive body image. And I think it's helpful to know that is such a normal thing to do. Like, to have, you'll likely still have negative body image days where you just don't feel great about your body, but it's just knowing that, well, it's the acceptance, is that like it's likely going to pass, it's a transient thing, and it's not then the next step is to really buy into those thoughts and change everything about my diet, that I need to do X, Y, and Z. But actually it's just, I know it will pass, it's just part of being human, and it's having that self-compassion to do that.
Yeah, exactly. The self-compassion piece of that combination of common humanity, of it's normal to have low body image, and everyone does, even people who I think have like the perfect body will have low body image days. And it's interesting when you see studies of bodybuilders and things actually having lower overall body satisfaction than other people, because they've dedicated their lives to physically changing it. And so then, like, they're, as you and I both said there about being in smaller bodies and exercising a lot more and tracking food, did that make us check our bodies more? And did that lead to more preoccupation of body than before? And is that a good thing or not? Like, you've got to find that line for you. Where do you think that sits with regards to, because I know you mentioned about, okay, if people have a large amount of body fat, that could actually have a health implication in terms of diabetes or cardiovascular disease or blood pressure. But where do you think it sits in terms of like, okay, I want to physically get a bit more muscular, or I want to lose a little bit of body fat. But how does that work without falling prey then to diet culture, body checking, and leading down to like a poorer relationship with with food and the self?
Yeah. I think a lot of it will come from a just general self-awareness, and it comes back to that word we've said a few times, intentions, and really being
Hmm.
genuinely clear on your intentions, and that ability to reflect regularly, realistically, on what were my intentions behind these decisions. How do I feel about doing this? And it's figuring out what that phase looks like might in itself take some time of, and I've taken a few clients through and it can be quite scary to have come through diet culture to then actually like I know this would benefit me, but I am either scared of going back to where I was and just scared of or just the unknown of what that could actually look like. uh and again, it's probably going to be a bit of trial, error, and compromise, and continuously to work on the self-acceptance and to um be aware of body checking and just generally of your body image. Um, but I guess so much of body image and our perception of ourselves is related to so many other things. So ensure that we're still engaging in the activities that we like doing, and the other facets of health that we know are likely going to still contribute to overall health. If we're going after it for physiological health, we need to ensure that it isn't kind of impacting our mental health, societal health, economic health. And so taking it as a broader picture, and it likely be in the case of monitoring, we monitor all of these things then of like how are you feeling when you're eating out? Are you still seeing your friends? How is work going? We're looking into just all of the other kind of facets of health, because we know that the overvaluation of shape and weight is often, you can help to reduce that. I always give this analogy of, um, say you're on the way to a party, a kid's birthday party, and you've got a bin bag full of balloons, birthday balloons, the biggest balloon in there at the moment. If someone who is struggling with their body image, the biggest balloon is the overvaluation of shape and weight. In that bag as well, they might have a balloon that has their career. There might be family and friends. They might be a keen footballer. There might be loads of different other things in there, and their hobbies and everything else that makes them them. And if we're able to put more energy, more air into these other balloons, there's only so much space for that big balloon, and it's going to reduce. Then the size and the weight of the overvaluation of our shape and body size has to reduce, because we put more energy into these other balloons. And so doing that and actively putting energy into these other areas helps to kind of manage and maintain our self-esteem, and our just how our perceptions of ourselves based on this weight that we are trying to reduce. So throwing energy into these other things is a really helpful way just to ensure that we're still kind of staying on track, and yeah, being okay, and coming about it from a good place that's not going back to where it was.
Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy, and I like that then holistic view of things of like how do we keep all of the like the wheels of health in a good place rather than sacrificing them for another, thinking that that's like the golden ticket to happiness, satisfaction, performance, or whatever it is that you are searching that for. And I think, as you said, your personal values are a key driver of that decision making, as are your deeper reasons as to why
Mhm.
you want a certain goal and what you think it's going to bring. Um, because when you go through those things, as you said, you might find that actually fat loss doesn't need to be there. Like we can just say, like, let's work on healthy habits. Let's work on your relationship with food. Let's work on your relationship with yourself. Let's work on exercise. Let's work on a diverse diet rather than eating the same fucking foods every day
Yeah.
and binging on Halo Top ice cream at night just because it's low calorie. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like I've
Absolutely.
never done that before. And
No, never.
tell us a bit about your background, Sammy, because like I always want to delve deeper into the person as well. Like we've had a great conversation here. I think that a lot of people can take and ask themselves some deeper questions about where they sit in this messy middle. But what about yourself? Like, because people listening to this have heard me, do a daily show for years and know my kind of journey from where I've been to where I am now. But talk us a bit about yours.
So I guess for me it was, so starting from the beginning, I was always in a bigger body growing up. My brother was fairly slim. I was always in a bigger body. It was always, I think my mum described me of when I was little. I was the youngest in my school, but she said I was the smallest. And it was the shortest, but not the smallest. So I was physically like short, but just bigger than a lot of other my classmates at age 5. Um, and so I think a lot of my perceptions growing up were of myself. I wasn't hugely active at school, and when I went to uni, I started playing rugby and fell in love with it and wanted to become a better athlete. And so my nutrition was generally around that. Probably did mask the fact that I was actually just like wanting to be smaller, by I wanted to perform better. There was a brief stint of Herbalife, I think, in my first year. My dad was doing it, so I was like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to be the best athlete I can. Herbalife is definitely the answer. And so kind of going through that to, but ultimately kind of improve my performance. Then injury kind of struck in, and probably for the last 4 years, I've had quite a lot of injuries, quite a lot of big injuries. And I think probably that has been one of the best things in self-acceptance, because I'd like be on crutches, have surgery, gain a little bit of weight, and then I'd spend time trying to reduce that, whether it was actively or it just kind of happened because I could be more active. And to be fair, it wasn't always intentional, just that I'd just get back into normal things and the weight would go again. But it would be such a cyclical thing, to the point where I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to stress about how I look. I know that if I'm trying to be smaller, it's probably going to impact my recovery, impact my likelihood of getting injured again. So it was just that, like, I just don't want to have to do this again. And that's why I always say injuries are so shit. They really are. But there's always good to come about them. And I think they definitely force a bit of self-acceptance. And it's definitely played a big part in my how I feel like now. And I think also thrown in there as well, for probably like 2 years, I was gluten and lactose intolerant. And that meant that you just couldn't eat like a fair bit of things. Couldn't eat cake, the standard stuff that if you go out for a coffee and a cake and you just can't eat a cake. So it was when the first lockdown came, where I've always loved food. It's been a big part of my family's life, loved cooking, that I was like, I want to be able to eat these things again. And knowing that would naturally come with probably gaining weight, I probably feared it a little bit. But again, probably just accepting that I want to be able to eat these things. And it probably, I then went through a phase in lockdown, as like a lot of people did, of realized I could then bake loads of stuff, and I love baking, so I would bake a shit ton, loads of stuff all the time, and naturally kind of would eat just loads of different things that I couldn't previously eat. And then just the knowing, and I didn't know this at the time, this is another analogy I use all the time, but diet culture is like breathing through a straw. I didn't make this one up. I don't know where I heard it, but breathing through a straw, that's kind of what diet culture is. You take the straw out when you kind of move away from it, or if you stop pursuing fat loss, you're gasping for air, you're trying to really breathe and get that air back in. And that's the kind of the same when we're dieting. We're restricting our air intake, or our general intake. We move out of a fat loss phase, and a lot of people, we find that we're kind of overeating. That was me when I was eat gluten and lactose again. So then get to this point where actually our breathing starts to go back to normal, and it starts to regulate. And that's the kind of the post the inhaling everything insight. And so I kind of went through that phase. I guess that, again, I had no really idea at the time, and it's only probably recently that I've realized that probably was quite a thing that did impact me. And I definitely see people now still using intolerances as reasons to not eat certain things to maintain a certain body shape. So yeah, moving on, I guess that's keeping it relatively brief. I mean, that's still quite a lot in that, but just moving
please make it as long as you need to. I'm sure, I'm enjoying it, and I'm sure a lot of people are getting a lot of resonating with it.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Injury probably was the big thing, and I was just like, I just don't want to do this. It's the constant cycling of going from one to the other. And yeah, understanding that self-worth comes from so many things, and how you look and the size of you isn't one of them. And particularly in the industry, it's working in the industry where a lot of that is still kind of common practice to look a certain way. Even last year, I did on Instagram, I've done a series of dressing gown diaries. I've literally got my dressing gown on my lap just here. And it was just after Perform X, so a big kind of industry-wide event where lots of people from the industry were talking. And I was kind of explaining how I wasn't scared to do my talk. Like, I completely understand that I know what I know, and I've learned that I have limitations as well. I don't know everything, and that's fine. If people ask me questions I don't know the answers to, I'm a human being, that's normal. So I was okay with that, but it was more the fact that I was going to be there with other practitioners, other people in the industry, and I don't look like a lot of people. That was a thing that kind of I was scared about. And so then that was a big realization that, okay, this is still a thing, and I don't want it to be like this. I don't want my habits or my behaviors to be kind of changed or influenced by this. And at that time, I realized that I wasn't really. I think I went through a phase of sharing a lot of food on social media, whether it was like more energy dense processed foods, and then I was like, actually no, people will judge me for doing that, and I'd often see other people do it, and even people I work with showing the pictures of like real tasty cakes, all that kind of stuff. But I was like, people will
Yep.
perceive that differently because I look different. So I stopped doing
Yeah.
it. Whether it was a conscious thing, subconscious thing, I don't really know. But I stopped doing that. And again, I realized like why? Why did I stop doing that? Why did I stop showing foods that is a big part of my life? So yeah, and now I think probably most of my Instagram know that I bloody love a hot cross bun.
Good.
And I will share that all the time whenever I have it. So now I feel like a hot cross bun is just part of my personality. And that's kind of I now will happily share when I'm eating something that's delicious, because it's a big part of my life, and ultimately it doesn't matter if people have perceptions of me based on that.
Yeah, good. Do you still feel that pressure? Do you still feel like people judge you?
Um, I guess probably yes, in the fact that I mean that people will do, they definitely will, but I guess my reaction and my perception of it has changed, and I'm sure there'll be days where I feel it more, and I have more negative feelings towards it, but the majority of the time, like, I just don't care. Like, I'm doing this because I want to, um, and in terms of helping clients as well, they see that I'm happy in my body. I'm working in the industry, and if I can do that, and hopefully other people can as well. And a lot of people that I work with are in the industry, and I really enjoy going on that journey with them and being part of it. And yeah, just showing that ultimately, if their intentions behind their doing are truly intrinsic and because it's what they want to do, then it doesn't matter what that is, and it doesn't matter if people are judging, because they will always judge. It's just that ability to not buy into it and change our actions or behaviors because of it. Do you feel
Yeah,
it?
and you're also. I don't feel it anymore, and I've gotten bigger in recent times, and I put that down to a combination of my relationship with food and self-improving, and also my priorities in life changing.
Yeah.
But like a human, I have low body image days, and like a human, I also have a thought process of like, would I be respected more if I look differently? And I think, as you said, people are people, and so we'll have that thought whether it's correct or not. And as you said, you're an evidence-based, accredited nutritionist professional, and you also don't eat a load of like fun food all of the time. But you felt
Yeah.
self-conscious in I posted about this recently about people because you and I aren't in larger bodies. We're just slightly bigger than the average fitness professional. And even then, like, we're not really, but we have that perception because of who we were growing up and the messages we internalized. That message you said from your mum that you heard when you were 5, you remember that now. And it's
Yeah.
like, just like I remember being teased when I was a kid if I was in my slightly bigger phase, whereas actually I internalized that weight stigma for so long. I thought that I was always bigger. And I can see a picture of me now at age 15, and I have it because it's me and my dad and my brother, and I lost my dad when I was 16, and that's why I have it there. And and that affected me for years. That thought, even though it wasn't true. And that's what's really disgusting, is that I posted about people who might be bigger. It doesn't mean that they're spouting incorrect information about food, and it also doesn't mean that they're just eating hot cross buns all the fucking time. Yet you
Yeah.
felt self-conscious about sharing that because you thought people would think that, even though someone smaller will go and stand in the queue at KFC, and everyone would be like, "Oh, it's amazing how good their relationship with food is, that they don't feel like self-conscious about sharing that." But someone else sharing that, it's like, "Oh, you're promoting obesity. What are you doing?"
Yeah. Yeah,
And
definitely.
And that's why I wanted to have the chat with you about sort of diet culture, fat loss, and because you think to yourself, well, that's not okay. But we have that bias in our head still, that thinner equals more knowledgeable and healthier. Whereas actually we can see from the data of like BMI and healthy habits that those habits and that relationship with food matters far more. And
Yeah,
people's genetic
definitely.
predisposition will give them a different result.
For sure. And I think that's in that last element of genetics has probably been something that's been underplayed, overplayed over and again. Like it's gone through phases. But like fundamentally, like I think genetics does have a really big impact on someone's just natural body weight. And sure there'll be so many environmental factors that can influence it. But it's just then that their experience of themselves, like we've both said, our experiences growing up are so different based on that thing. Even like me versus my brother, I actually had a really great conversation with him. Last year we were on holiday and it was like our last meal, and we were out at a nice restaurant and we had never really spoken about this before. We were just talking about stuff, and how my perceptions and my growing up was so different to him, even though we were under the same roof, same parents, but our experiences were very different. There were so many things that I could pinpoint that influenced me now, and they were just so new to him. He'd never heard that, and it was so nice to have that conversation. And I think we often forget that ultimately everyone's opinions now are just influenced by their experiences of life, and that will look so different for different people. And it might be that the genetics plays a different part in it. And sure, me and my brother have similar genetics, but if we look at my parents, like both of they look different. Their relationship with food is very different, and it makes sense that my brothers and I are quite different. And so it's seeing that and not overplaying it, but acknowledging that it is a thing. And for some people, like it's going to be harder partly because from a genetic standpoint, but our experiences in that genetic body our whole life will then impact us now. And it's again, it kind of plays into the acceptance of what we can and can't do and what we want to do. It's definitely one that I think has been over talked about, under talked about for some people. And I think also in that as well, weight stigma, I think for even people in bigger bodies, addressing that, this kind of goes into the big journey of when you're looking to lose weight and maybe you've come from diet culture, but still addressing your internalized weight stigma and knowing that you can still have internalized weight stigma if you're someone who is in a bigger body or if you're someone who's overweight or obese. And for sure, I think we generally consider it for those in smaller bodies and their weight stigma, but it's ultimately it is a societal thing that everyone will experience. And I think so much of self-acceptance is having to address your internalized weight stigma, which again will go back from when you were little and from growing up and your all experiences of life at various different points. I think that's a big key to ultimately, I guess, feeling happy and ensure that you're striving for fat loss for the right reasons.
Yeah, massively. And internalized weight stigma is there because of the messages that you have growing up said to you and all around you. And it's that culture of thinner equals healthier and happier, which is not the case all the time.
Yeah.
Because even use of the words overweight and obese, we have to wonder where they've come from. And is that categorized from the BMI, which both you and I is complete horse tits. And particularly because the categories of those was even reduced after it was made, because it was they reduced it from an insurance policy point of view, so much so that Sammy, like, I'm obese.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
BMI
I am
wise,
too. Yeah, I think
I'm
I probably.
obese. My BMI is 33, right? But I had a health check, and I get health checks regularly because my dad died of heart disease, right? So it's like I'm on top of that shit. And the thing is that internalized weight stigma for me as well, because my dad was a larger bloke for a lot of his life. Actually, when he passed away, he was a smaller bloke, but he passed away. Like, cardiovascular disease was there because he never exercised, smoked like a chimney, stressed out of his dish. Actually ended up with thyroid problems. And so actually, like, for me in my journey, my mission, I thought, was to help people lose fat because I needed to lose fat because I needed to improve my health. That was actually me just masking that internalized weight stigma. actually, if my dad exercised, oh, hello, Cloud.
Oh,
If
hi.
my
Hello.
Cloud wants to be on the podcast. For people not watching
I
the
mean,
video,
that
I've
absolutely
just
made
been
my
attacked
day.
by a chocolate Labrador. Hi, mate.
I mean, that's
It's
a way to go.
it's time for the
Hello.
lunchtime walk. That's the thing. All right,
That's
mate.
it.
Sit down. I'll sit down. I'm nearly done.
That has made my day. I'm obsessed with dogs.
Yeah, they are great. They are lovely, and they are very well behaved, and they're intuitive. They're intuitive eaters. There's still food over there in their bowl,
Yeah.
which is impressive for Labradors.
Yeah.
But going back to that,
Yeah,
you know,
that
like
isn't.
it was his healthy habits that were missing, which is why I actually feel like my message now in helping people find more body acceptance and overcoming their body dysmorphia and disordered eating, because as you said, genetics has been over talked about and under talked about. But I think from a predisposition of like, if I showed you my food diary and was completely 100% honest, okay, there are some times where I might snack a bit when I'm not hungry, and like, yeah, okay, like there still are some times when I might drink when I'm stressed or whatever. But like, I go to, you know, I do functional fitness 5 times a week. I have an active recovery day. I walk 12 to 15,000 steps because I've got 2 Labradors and I walk to and from the gym. Like, if you gave my calories and my activity to someone else, there'd be a different result.
Yeah,
You know, and you can't underplay that, in my opinion. And I think it's helpful to then say to that person, well, you're concerned about your health because you're told all of these messages about being obese. But actually, have you had your cholesterol checked? Have you had your blood sugar checked? Have you had your resting heart rate checked? Your VO2 max checked, and all these things? Because that's health. And fat complications are usually at much higher thresholds of visceral fat, which aren't seen with active people.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point of looking at like what actually are the markers of health. Equally,
Yeah.
I think when addressing internalized weight stigma.
That's a great new word, addressalizing. I like it. Let's make that a thing. Hashtag
I enjoy
addressalizing.
So addressalizing weight stigma, I think it can be helpful to look at the characteristics or the habits that you think someone who is obese does. And often people will say it's like not exercising, it's like eating ultra processed foods, not eating a balanced diet, all of those kind of things. And then you ask them, like, do you do those things? You kind of you match it up and like, do your habits align with those things? And they realize that actually, yeah, they don't, and they might be overweight, but they do have all of these health seeking activities. Like you say, they walk a fair amount, they eat a balanced diet, have a good relationship with food, get a couple chocolate Labradors on a regular basis. And actually they do all of these things that don't align with this identity that they've created for someone who is obese or overweight. And I think that's always a really interesting part of it.
Absolutely. And you know, that's why it's so important to, again, come back to your what are the determinants of health? What are the determinants of your social health, mental health, physical health, health with food? And then, you know, your goal of wanting to drop body fat, is it from that internalized weight stigma and potential fat phobia? You know, let's call it a spade. But then also that fear of judgment from other people that you and I have both just spoken about. And it is that same thing. Like, why should I feel self-conscious of posting the fact that I'm eating a pan of chocolate because I'm worried about people judging me as a nutritionist and a personal trainer, when actually someone out like Ollie Marchon, you know, might post the fact that he's having a pan of chocolate and everyone's like, love that bloke. Like, what a great relationship with food and fitness that guy has.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's, you know, why is it okay for one and not the other?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, it's not. That's the thing. It shouldn't be that way.
I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of our HQ members about kind of like role models and assuming someone's habits and their relationship with food or their relationship with themselves ultimately by looking at them. And the general consensus was that like some people who are in bigger bodies and the kind of perceptions that we see, this person was kind of assuming that they are a better role model and they want to be more like them, versus the people who are like super lean, who are like great athletes, and a byproduct of kind of how they train and their whole lifestyle. But actually in kind of putting more emphasis on looking at or assuming the kind of habits based on someone's look. And actually when you just can't assume that at all, because you don't know. Sure, you can see on the surface the habits that they do and the fact that they might eat a few more fun foods and everything like that. But actually, you don't know their relationship with food or their relationship with themselves. You don't know that if they're actively trying to pursue weight loss, or if they are genuinely comfortable in their body. But we just think because they're someone who looks to be happy in their body, or they are in a slightly bigger body, that it's particularly coming from like a diet culture place where historically they might have said the lean people are the role models, but now we've just moved the goalpost, and we've now like the people who have a bit more body fat are the role models, when actually we don't know what the underlying habits are there. We don't know the intentions, and they might be so different. And as you say, like you just can't make that assumption.
Can't assume. No, you can't. And that's what that is what is unequivocally wrong.
Mm.
And you know, like how I'm glad that you were able to overcome that thought process, you know, of like, and I think that's a big one for personal trainers and fitness enthusiasts who I speak to, who are in slightly bigger bodies, is that fear of judgment and that fear of not being listened to, or that fear of like, I need to look a certain way to be listened to. And like, I did a poll on that on Facebook, and you know, unfortunately, people were like, well, I want them to at least be practicing what they preach. I'm like, but you can't tell if they're doing that or not based on what they look like.
Yeah.
But the message is that you should be. That's the message. You eat and train like this, and you'll look like this. And it's like, doesn't work like that. And I'm not saying that people who are shredded and that don't work hard, because of course they do. And like, I'll tell you my CrossFit performance background. Yeah, I was walking 20 to 30,000 steps a day, and I was training twice a day because I was a fucking CrossFit coach. So my whole day was revolved around doing that. And yeah, I did that, and I was shredded, but I tracked all of my calories. I was able to eat 3,300 calories a day, which, you know, that's a lot of food to be in a deficit with.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, it was flexible, ate a lot of Lion Bar cereal, you know, had a great time. But I was also desperate to reach 85 kilos, still thought I looked fat, body checking all the time, tracking all my food. If I wasn't tracking, I was binging. Is that healthy?
Yeah.
You know? So
yeah, it's all it's those assumptions that we just can't do.
I was working very hard, you know, so I'm not saying that people who are, you know, jacked and all the rest don't work hard and they just have good genetics, because obviously they train very hard. But we've got to then like help people have that compassion who are like, you know, do you have the time frame and no.
Yeah.
You don't have the time to dedicate your lives to it.
For sure. And it's the acceptance of that, of like you to achieve what you're looking for is likely unachievable if you can't or unwilling to put in all of those things. Yeah. It's a difficult one. And I guess to kind of come back to, can you, like, where I stand with fat loss, and I guess we've spoken about it from a performance standpoint at the start, and how for some people it's going to benefit their performance, some people it's not, it's just a kind of a bit of a mask. But I think like having an aesthetic goal, I think is seeing like, does it align with the values is probably like the best place to go, and what does it mean? And I think in general, to summarize it's looking at what your self-worth is now, what makes you, and it might be that I would prefer to be smaller, but I don't have to, and it's looking at a kind of preference rather than a must. Like, I must be smaller to be happy. It's the kind of, okay, right, yeah, sure, I might prefer it, but I know it's not going to impact my self-worth or my ability to be a good friend, partner, do well at my job. And I think that's the difference, is when it moves from that prefer to I must, and how that impacts it. And I think that's when it is okay to pursue fat loss. There's always going to be people that want to, but it's understanding the intentions and knowing that it isn't like the be all and end all of your life. And if it impacts other areas of your life, then you know that it's actually probably not a hugely helpful thing for you. So it's not anti-dieting at all. It's just intentional dieting is the way to do it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And I think like a great summary of what we've spoken about, and particularly your straw analogy of like gasping for air afterwards. Like, I think a lot of people could resonate with that. And it's then thinking, to avoid that, how how can I, if at all, go through pursuing that goal. So Sam, thank you for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story as well, being so open and honest. Instagram, is that the best place to send people who want to see more of your content?
Yeah, probably me in my dressing gown and my hot cross buns, and
I know.
probably some dogs somewhere.
I want to see more of these, hot cross buns and dressing gown votes.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be plenty of it. Yeah, so Instagram is definitely the best place. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Some really good chats, as I'm sure we expected.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks again for taking the time.